Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast. My name is David. This is episode 45.
Is that what it is?
Like an extremely high number.
45.
45. We've almost been doing
Halfway
these
to
for
90.
a year. Thank you. every podcast is halfway to some number.
Yes,
if you could, from now on,
I'm just showing
This is my pledge to our viewers and listeners. Pastor Mike's going to tell us what we're halfway to at every podcast.
Because I'll guarantee you, like
the
40,
math will get wrong
47,
eventually.
I'm going to mess that one up. I can tell you right now.
Well, as always, Pastor Mike is here with me. Hello, Pastor Mike.
Hello, David.
I'm excited. It's been a couple weeks. I was gone on a Thursday, and were you gone too? No, you were here. I was gone on that Thursday. I don't know.
We
kind
of rotated because we normally.
So we had to record a couple.
Yeah.
And so we haven't recorded one in a while. So I'm excited to record one.
Although we release them every week, so they really don't know. Yeah. So you just spill the beans.
Yeah, they can figure it out when I'm wearing the same shirt in both episodes.
Wow.
If they really...
Yeah.
We have some Grow Podcast detectives that have probably broken that down.
Figured that out because,
they're podcasts. They're not supposed to be live.
Yeah.
So, but hello to everybody. Happy Mother's Day to any of the mothers that may join us on the Grow Podcast.
The week after Mother's Day.
Yes.
Did you do anything for your mother?
Of course. Really, once you have, tiny people in the house, all you really have to do for Mother's Day is just like FaceTime and let her look at the tiny people, and train them to say Happy Mother's Day, Nana, or something like that. But
nice.
Yeah. Yep. Make sure that
one of the
knows
things I bought my mother is a throw pillow that says, "Mom, you are so blessed. None of your kids are ugly." It's not it, but it's not word for word, but it's pretty close. And, yeah, that's the kind of gift I get my mom.
Wow.
She's so proud of me.
She is so lucky. We had a very, if you're on our YouTube channel right now, it should be up by now. You can see our Mother's Day video. We did a fun Mother's Day video. So you can go check that out on our YouTube channel as well.
There are some great moments in that video.
Your wife was one of the stars.
I've heard that.
Excellent work.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. That was a good time. They did a great job.
What's so fun about that, she was telling me she had a hard time not delivering those lines with a sarcastic tone because they are words that she would have said to her own kids.
Well, they were, sarcastically. She would have said them sarcastically to Brendan and Ian.
Sarcasm is how we raised our kids, I think, sometimes.
We could sense, like, oh, you've said that before, just with a lot of sarcasm, but we're going to need the sarcasm removed for the bit that we're doing. But she did great. It's a lot of fun. You should check that out. If you are on our YouTube channel, thank you. It's the video podcast. Hello. Give him a wave, Pastor Mike.
Wow.
Pastor Mike's very blue today.
I am kind of blue.
If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, run over to our YouTube channel to see the baby. You're very Norwegian.
It does say Norway.
My wife's family will really appreciate what you've got going on today. Is there any? It's not like Sentnamai or however you say that or anything like that. That's not right now. You're just wearing super Norwegian clothes for fun? I like it.
Yeah.
Are you super Norwegian?
I'm mostly Norwegian.
Norwegian. We'll count that as
mostly Norwegian on my dad's side and a whole bunch of other stuff on my mom's side.
I do enjoy Williston, where we live, on whatever that holiday is that I slaughtered the name of.
I have no idea.
It's like the big it's like Norwegian July 4th or something like that. But all the places in town here go crazy on it, and there's all sorts of like Norwegian cookies everywhere.
See, I have the genetics, but evidently I don't have the culture.
Apparently. Got some work to do. Head down to the Sons of Norway and they'll
need to, evidently.
Well, shall we
Well, now that we just slaughtered the first... I'm so glad that you're with us.
Slaughter. That's the real reason they show up, and they tune us out for the next 20
when
minutes.
we actually get to the real stuff. So I thought we would have some fun because it was Mother's Day weekend, and this last weekend, if you're with us the weekend after, I got the privilege of my wife speaking with me as we did the next episode of Jesus Never Said That episode. Is that the right word for that? Next teaching. But since it's Mother's Day, I thought we would start with a little bit of extra nonsense.
Okay.
And kind of do speed questions.
Oh, interesting.
Okay? Speed questions. So
does that mean the questions are fast or the answers are fast?
I'm going to ask the question, and you have to answer like in a couple seconds, in one sentence or less. Okay? One sentence or less. And I really, really hope your mom watches this. If she doesn't, I know your dad does.
He does.
And Tom, make sure she does watch this.
My mom has better things to do than watch this podcast.
Okay. All right. You ready for this?
At least this part of the podcast.
Ready for this? One thing your mom taught you.
Manners. I can't speak with food in my. And I don't mean like being polite to you, but
So
like
much for the speed round.
I can't speak with food in my mouth.
Wow.
If you ask me a question, I either cover
You've got it.
or
She did? All right.
stuff like
All
that.
right.
I just can't do.
All right. One thing you love about your mom.
Man, one thing. I mean, she's. My mom's fun. I have a lot of fun with my mom.
One characteristic you most hope you have from your mom.
Oh man. My mom is insane, like an insanely hard worker. Sometimes just to the perfectionist level of it, but she's just like, she's never at like a party or something like that and not helping. She's never not working hard. And so I would love to have that characteristic.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
She's a really good gardener, but I don't want that characteristic.
You don't want that.
What do I need to garden for? You can go to the grocery store or the
That's what grocery
floral
stores
shop and
are
get all
for.
that stuff. Love you, Mom.
I love it. Well, that was a tribute to moms for this
Can I
Mother's Day.
change my answer on one thing I love about my mom?
Okay.
She's insanely good at Tetris.
Okay.
Like insanely good
Really?
at Tetris.
That's a skill. That's probably a gift.
She's very good at that, like those kind of puzzles and games and stuff. But I would like leave some days if she didn't have a ton to do that day, and she'd be on like the same game of Tetris on like level like 115, which I didn't even think was a real level, but she's very good at Tetris.
Yeah. In the meantime, I would be at like level 0.2. Yeah. I got stuck on the squares. How do the squares fit together? Well.
What are we going to talk about today, Pastor Mike?
Well, Kylie and I taught this weekend because we've been working through this series, Jesus Never Said That. And it doesn't sound like a Mother's Day theme, but actually I've heard a lot of moms use this in a little bit of a way to guilt one another. But I think it's something a lot of people have bought into. They believe that the Bible said, or Jesus said, that he will never let you experience more than you can handle. And the reality of it is probably all of us have felt at times we've experienced life more than we can handle, more than,
for sure.
than we've overwhelmed. We've talked about a lot of those between the two of us just personally over the last few years. And we unpacked that over the weekend. But what I want us to go into here for a few minutes and for us just to have kind of discussion about is, so what do you do when you feel like you're overwhelmed? It's not just, I think we busted the myth of what the Bible says about that and what the Bible really says about that over the weekend. You can go back and listen to that.
Check that out on our
But
YouTube
what do you
channel.
do if you feel like you're overwhelmed? And so before we go into the teaching, I mean, we've talked a little bit about for you and for me in times in our life when we feel like we've been overwhelmed. Yeah. What's one thing, and I didn't warn David on this one.
It's rarely good
that you've learned from those moments that you do now when you begin to feel you're overwhelmed or when you get overwhelmed?
That I do now, or like
something
a bad
you've
thing
learned.
that I did? Sure. I mean, I'm very intentional about talking to specific people in those moments, like sharing, like I'm feeling overwhelmed, this is my situation, because in the past when I've tried to keep those things to myself, that just internalizing it does not work.
Vital. I think that's probably the big thing for me too. And my personality is such that I tend to want to keep things to myself, and it's kind of like I'm just going to gut through this. But I've learned I just can't.
I'm the same way.
I'll argue with myself for a while about it if I'm real honest. I think I can do this. I think I can do this, and then it'll kind of come to a head and I realize, no, we need to, or I need to share that. And that's one of the first things that I want to talk about. Is I want to take us to a story, not a story Jesus told, but an account of an encounter with Jesus. 10 guys who had an encounter with Jesus. And in Luke chapter 17, it says, as Jesus continued on toward Jerusalem, he reached the border between Galilee and Samaria, so kind of in that in-between land in Israel. As he entered the village there, 10 men with leprosy stood at a distance because it was extremely contagious. They cried out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And if you look at this, if we just stop there, here's 10 guys who are obviously overwhelmed. They had a disease and they were dying from it. And the disease caused them to be isolated from everybody except other people who are dying from it. I actually, when I went to Israel here a couple years ago, there's a church built over the place that they think this probably happened.
Wow. That's cool.
Because there's a cave there that's called the Leper's Cave, and it's been used as that actually over the years. And you have to climb this ladder down into this hole, and it would have been outside of town. And it's a real depressing, dark place. And if it wasn't these 10 guys, at least people who had leprosy, I mean, it's known as a fact that over the years this is where this was. And you talk about being overwhelmed, hopeless. And I think this story and what they did helps us understand what we do when we feel overwhelmed. Because we talked over the weekend about what God uses those moments of being overwhelmed for, even though it's not fun. And when we're overwhelmed, it's all about focusing on, and we're in the Grow podcast, so it's always this, right? But it is so much of life, our next step.
Right.
Because one of the reasons we get overwhelmed is we want to get out of where we are. So we want to get to the end of the road, the other side of the tunnel, the other side of the mountain, whatever metaphor we can use there. And that overwhelms us. And to keep that from happening us, we just need to begin movement. So just focus on the next step. So these guys actually model for us next step. And you just talked about the key one. The first one is just admit that you need help. And sometimes that's the hardest, isn't it? For us. There's a reason that when you go to 12-step groups, what's the first step?
You always have to admit you have a problem.
Admit you have a problem. And here's these 10. Lord, have mercy. And one of the keys to admitting is not just admitting to have a problem. You have to admit that something is going to have to change in order for things to change. Because sometimes we say, I know with me, I'll say, I want this to stop, but I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing in order to change things. So it's not just admit there's a problem. I have to admit that something's got to change in order for change to happen. Admit you need help.
Is it wrong for us to just ask to be out of the situation? Like I think about Jesus
wrong.
In the garden.
Yeah.
Right. He's just like, please take me out of this situation. Now he qualifies it by saying, but not my will, but yours be done. But is it okay for us to just
Absolutely.
be like, you gotta just get me out of here?
I think one of the most harmful things that happens sometimes is we suppress our emotions. Our emotions are real, and Jesus modeled that for us. Jeremiah was called the weeping prophet, and he was rarely condemned for that, if ever. I'm trying to think of a time. I mean, he wrote a whole book called Lamentations.
You think he liked that nickname?
Yeah, not a real long book. Have you ever wondered why it's not a long book? He got tired of lamenting. That's my best joke I've got, all right?
Pastor jokes.
Yeah, pastor jokes.
My dad's laughing right now.
But you've got to admit that you need help because loneliness is the chain that will that will hold you back all the time. Yeah. Second thing is another step. So each one of these, each one of these is a next step. So part of this, as we go through this, I'm going to go through fairly quickly, is just to identify where you are and focus just on your next step. Don't focus on, here's the
Don't jump ahead to the fifth thing if
you haven't admitted that you need help, then that's your next step.
Yeah.
Don't focus on anything else. Just find some people you trust.
Yeah.
Obviously, these guys trusted Jesus.
Because realistically, going through a list of steps could add to the feeling of being overwhelmed. If you're like, well,
Absolutely.
I feel overwhelmed. To get out of it, I have a multi-step process that I haven't even started yet. Now I feel more overwhelmed.
And that's honestly some of the reason why I get overwhelmed, because I get stuck in my head. But I'm a reader and I'm a studier, so I'll pick up a book and the book gives me 20 ways to fix what you're doing. And I'm going, I can't do that. I can barely function on one. So just one. The next step is choose to be in the right place. Choose to be in the right place. If you look at the story, And I'll unpack what I mean by that. If you look at the story, what did Jesus say? He said, go and show yourself to the priests. And as they went, they were healed. So they were on their way to the house of worship. And some people might say I'm reading into this, but here's what I've experienced. Something happens. In fact, I wrote in my notes, it's impossible to describe what God can do when we go to his house and spend time with his people in worship together. It's impossible for us to fully experience the work of God when we're in the wrong place, the wrong patterns, and yes, some of it is a little bit geographical of, I need to hang out with God's people. Yep. I need corporate worship. I need to be in a small group. And we aren't just talking about that because we think it's a good idea. Right. It's a biblical pattern. Hebrews 10 says, let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another. Corporate worship, experiencing the presence of God, worshiping him, serving others, building transformational relationships. We need those things. So, and if you're still in, your next step is the first one, admitting that you need help. One of the problems with taking that step of admitting you need help is one of the reasons we get overwhelmed is we don't have people around us who will come alongside of us. Not that we still won't feel overwhelmed, but we were not meant to carry the burdens of this life by ourselves. And it's not just that, people say, well, Jesus will carry them with you. It's why he made the church. He made the church to be his physical presence of carrying them with us. And going back to your question about the prayer, we tend to say, God, deliver me from this. We tend to want the extraordinary.
Sure.
And God grows us best in the ordinary.
That's good.
So the third step here is pay attention to your perspective. So a lot of self-help books will begin to talk about attitude and pay attention to your perspective. I don't think that's first step, because I can't always change my attitude when I'm overwhelmed. And sometimes I have every right to be overwhelmed. If there's a loss, if things are tough, things are difficult. There's some things that I actually I've shared with our New Hope body of just some things we've been dealing with for years now with the building in Williston. And at times it's been overwhelming because it's a multi-million-dollar overwhelming problem. I'm so grateful for a group of people that have come alongside me. But I haven't been able to just wake up in the morning and go, yay, and pretend to be smiling. Now, I can do that if I admitted I need help and I have people around me and I'm in that right place.
Sure.
I'm engaging in worship. Then I can begin to pay attention to my perspective. And when you look at this, 10 were healed, but only one came back and thanked Jesus. And you think about this, they all started the same. They all cried out. They all admitted. They all went to the right place. They all encountered Jesus. Jesus sent all of them on their way. All of them were healed. They all had the same experience. But they had different perspectives on it. You think about this. They all, one group saw Jesus. The one guy realized, oh, Jesus saw me. And he wanted to go back to Jesus. The 9 said, he finally heard us. Or what we're saying, people finally heard us. This guy realized, oh, it's Jesus specifically who heard me. So there's a change in perspective here. They're like, we were healed. And this guy's going, no, Jesus healed me. We got our old lives back. Here's a COVID thing. We got to go back to our lives.
Back to normal.
Instead of this guy saying, Jesus gave me new life. See, you hear the perspective?
Yeah.
I got what I asked for. This guy's going, Jesus gave me more than I deserve.
He's just, his focus on Jesus as opposed to the 9's focus on themselves.
And it's so amazing how we can see the same thing but see it with different perspective. Do you remember, was it a couple years ago or so, around on social media, that picture of that dress was floating around. Everybody's going, what color is this dress? And all the controversy.
We just lost 30 viewers.
Was it blue and black? Was it white, gold? And everybody saw the same thing, but they saw something different. And there's all kinds of reasons for it. But
have you heard the other one?
No, I haven't.
it's an audio one, and it's green needle, or I can't remember what the other word is, but it's the same thing.
Because obviously that's what you heard.
That one is that one is if whatever you tell yourself it's saying, you're gonna hear.
So
if you say this one, like it says green needle, you hear green needle, and then it was the same kind of thing where everyone would argue about what it's actually saying. Those things are weird.
They are, but it proves part of what I'm saying is we can experience or see the same thing, but where we see it or hear it from a different perspective. And I mean, what you just said made my point. What you tell yourself you heard is what you hear. And that's so much of our perspective. I put in my notes, where you sit determines what you see. You think about this. I was at the top of a mountain one time, and a friend of mine was talking about these planes that were flying around below us, because we were up so high. And I'm like, I don't see planes. There's no planes. And I'm thinking, they're just birds. There's birds. And finally he said, come over here. And I came over just like 6 inches. It wasn't all that far. And all of a sudden, I saw from the angle he saw, and sure enough, we happened to be in another country, and that country's version of the Blue Angels, like the Air Force team, was rehearsing. But we were so high up there underneath us. But 6 inches was all it took. So for me, part of what this means in changing my perspective is sometimes when I'm overwhelmed, often when I'm overwhelmed, this goes back to being around people, I need someone else to process and to talk through so that I get a right perspective. And I've needed sometimes professional help, people that are skilled to walk through that. Sometimes I need to ask God to help me see it from his perspective. Isaiah says, God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are nothing like your ways. And he walks through that. But you notice what he never says? He never says that we are not capable of thinking and understanding that. He goes on, he goes, my ways are higher than yours. The whole idea of what Isaiah was capturing there is we can learn to see and hear things from God's perspective. We tend to assume that our perspective is it. And when we ask him to see from his perspective, so pay attention to our attitude, pay attention to your perspective, what you're seeing.
Do you ever struggle to go back a step, right? Be around people. I remember I'm trying to remember when it was. It was towards the end of my basketball season this year, and we had a lunch. And I told you I was feeling overwhelmed because we were in a crazy season here at the church, and then the crazy end of the basketball season. There was just so much. But I felt bad bringing that up with you because you were dealing with building stuff. And I remember the day we went out, you had a meeting with the building thing, and you were just, it was one of those just brutal days for you. And I was like, how can I sit and complain about my stuff when Pastor Mike's going through bigger stuff? Do you ever have that struggle where you're like, I don't want to, go to this person who has their, it's almost like a twisted perspective of, I know that you're dealing with things, so I don't want to burden you with my overwhelmedness. And
that's one of the lies that we tell ourselves that keeps us isolated.
Sure.
Well, my problems are because we get caught in the comparison game, and comparison is the thief of joy. So my problems are smaller than their problems, and I don't want to burden them with my problems. And certainly, probably sometimes you have to be careful, but more often than not, I think there is a shared sense of we're in this crazy thing together. I don't remember who it was I read recently said, none of us gets off this planet without scars. Because it's a planet that has been infected by sin, and we're all scarred by it together. So I think don't let yourself fall into that trap of mine isn't as big a deal as somebody else, because then it will become a bigger deal to you. You're locking it in the closet, and it begins to fester, and all that stuff in your
as we learned in our last series, all of our stories matter. Just because some stories seem bigger or seem crazier than others, you titled that "My Story Matters" for a reason, because every one of us has a story that matters.
And one of the things I think that's happened, one of the things that has helped me, I don't feel it in the moment, if I'm real honest, but if I'm feeling exceptionally overwhelmed and someone comes to me and they're feeling overwhelmed, number one, I feel like, okay, I'm not the only one struggling right now. Number two, nice. when I'm able to turn it off of my stuff and I'm able to help one another, another person, it changes my perspective.
Sure.
Let's go back to Hebrews. He says, but let us encourage one another all the more as you see the day approaching. And he's talking about don't give up meeting together. So part of what that is changing my perspective. Instead of just about me, it's God, what are you teaching me, and how can I help others? One of the things that Kylie and I talked about over the weekend is God loves to redeem our stories and turn our stories into something that will bring healing into somebody else's story. More often than not, the things that overwhelm us, that we allow God to restore in us, that he wastes nothing. He will turn it into something where we can use our story so that we better understand someone else going through a similar thing. I think of what's happening in our grief group on our Williston campus right now. This group is just growing and growing and growing because so many of us have experienced so much trauma. And we've got a couple who's leading this group who went through horrible loss that no one should ever have to go through. And I get choked up just thinking about what they went through. And it's still hard. It's still hard. There's still pain. But God is redeeming that, and they're leading a couple dozen people at least now through their own trauma. And God's using this, redeeming their story and the loss of one of their kids to begin to redeem and help other people with their stories. The last next step, and we tend to want to do this first, and I think this is number 4, is identify what's overwhelming you and take one step to overcome it. Because we tend to want to overcome what's overwhelming us, but we're sitting in the wrong place. We don't have the right tools. David, and I'll give the example of David, not this David, but King David. Guy who eventually became King David when he was a child, and most of us are familiar with the story of David and Goliath. Before he went down to meet Goliath, he went to a river and found rocks. And I wonder how much of a conversation was happening between him and the Lord as he's picking up rocks. But from what we read the story, he was picking up rocks confidently. Why? Because he's already worked through some of the first steps. God, I can't beat this giant on my own, but you can. He was already in the right place. He'd spent hours in worship, and God had prepared him, and he learned through his past trials. And he talks about, I've defeated the lion, I've defeated the bear, and so he's got a right perspective on that. Now he's able to identify what's overwhelming him. And he doesn't focus on, I'm just going to rush right down there and kill. What's his next step? Next step, I need to pick up some rocks. And so what's your next step? What's your next step? So admit, get in the right place. So it's the right habits. Then begin to work on perspective. Am I seeing this from God's perspective through the lens of Scripture? And then identify what really is overwhelming me. I was real overwhelmed with something here recently, and finally admitted it to Kylie, and she looked at me and she said, I don't think that's the problem. And she named something else. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I didn't connect that. And it was something else that was actually causing this. And I needed her to identify what was overwhelming me. And then we were able to begin to address that and take some next steps. And it's a little bit like tipping dominoes. You just take the next step and motion happens. And you feel that way.
And you see that next step. The next step after the next step.
A lot of times you don't feel it till you look back and all the dominoes are tipped. But it's at least putting things in motion.
You got homework for us this week, Pastor Mike?
I think I'm going to give you kind of that next step kind of things. First of all, if you're feeling overwhelmed, your next step is just to admit it. Just to admit it. If you have admitted someone else, then I'm going to give you just some basic right place habits. Make sure you're starting your week in church. Make sure you're starting your day. And you may not be a morning person, but however you start your day in the Word somehow, some way. Even if it's just on your way to work, put some worship music in. So, I often use the Bible app, and I just let it read. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, pay attention how you're starting your prayers. Are you starting your prayers with thankfulness? Because that changes my perspective. So any one of those. Any one of those as we step into this.
All right. Well, thank you, Pastor Mike. Thank thank everybody for joining us. We went end up a little long on this one.
We did. I wasn't really watching.
Talk about our mothers at the beginning.
Can we talk too much about our mothers?
That's a good point. So now we're going to have another 40 minutes where we're going to talk. No. But happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there.
Yep.
To my mom specifically. I love you. Happy Mother's Day. And thank you for joining us on the Grow Podcast. You mentioned it a couple times, but we say it every week. Growth always starts with the next step. Yep. So that's why we're always talking about next steps at New Hope and here on the Grow Podcast. So let's make sure we take a next step this week as we're learning how to deal with being overwhelmed. Thank you, Pastor Mike.
Thank you.
And we will see you guys next time.